Tonight I'm about to reveal a lie that has kept you grounded for years, decades for some, that no matter what you do, you still to win this wrestle against an opponent called life. It is impossible that you get up early in the morning, you eat right, you go to the gym, you've done every single thing, you've engaged in every concentration demand as touching your desires, you've affirmed, you've manifested, you've done every single thing in order to materialize the outcome, yet it doesn't seem forthcoming. Then this information is for you. If you've been following this channel long enough, you understand that the concepts are very unique ideas. This is unheard of. One of the goals of this channel is to bring ideas that are seemingly unrelated, distill them into keys to solve life problems. So what you're about to hear is not the regular information on the internet distilled with personal anecdotes in an attempt to repay you, in an attempt to get paid. Because unfortunately, what those influencers are doing is oversimplifying the concept in an attempt to get paid. That's exactly what they are doing. What majority of you do not understand why you gravitate towards my content is because of one of these key reasons. My contents are unique ideas. They are unique philosophy. It's not something you hear on the internet. If you go on the internet, you notice something remarkable that all of their information, all of their keys converge. It's almost similar. The distinguishing factor is the personal examples, but the principles share a common denominator. Well, one might say, ah, but success leaves clues, and if everybody is going in this direction to achieve a result, then it's most likely that path leads to the desired outcome. And I agree with you. In fact, you are an intelligent individual for highlighting that unique direction in that argument. However, there are exceptions to rules. What works for brother A sometimes might not work for brother B. What works for brother C might not work for brother D. So you must devise and explore the various outlets. There's no single way to success. If you put 10 entrepreneurs in a room, how did you get rich? They will give you 10 different answers. Through tailoring, through business, I own a lorry company, construction, move food, but they all have the desired outcome, which is success. By that statement, you should already prove that there is no one right way, there's no one pathway. I agree if you say there are foundational principles, discipline, persistence, hard work. Those are immutable laws when it comes to success. But for you to sit and truly believe that there's only one direction in order for you to attain success, it is a lie. You know it as well as I do. You only comfort yourself with that kind of belief because you stupidly want to bask in the assumption that you tried hard and you've done this, it doesn't work, therefore you're not qualified for success. You're only looking for an alibi to give up. So in the days to come, you can say, I tried, but it didn't work. You want to comfort yourself with failure. And I'm here to give you that information. Unfortunately, unfortunately, if this is your life and you've been enjoying yourself, if this is your life and you've been shielding yourself from the consequences of your decision being failure, then click out of this video now. Because what you would hear would shake the foundation. What you would hear will disrupt your philosophy. And as a wise man famously pointed out, that once the mind is expanded by an idea, it is impossible for it to return to its original dimension. So once you sustain this information, it is impossible for you to unlearn it. Quantum leap, quantum leap, quantum leap. That is the nucleus of tonight's discussion. You see, the school system has convinced you to believe that results are achieved systematically. So grade 1 to grade 2, then grade 3, and in that manner. Unfortunately, how you do the small things is how you do the big things. That's why the Bible famously says, "He who is faithful in little is faithful in large." So how you do the small things is how you do the big things. If you cannot manage $100 and you're expecting an astronomical payday, more money just means more money for you to consume. So if you're faithful in little, you are faithful in large. The point, or if you have to extrapolate it to the discussion at hand, how you do the small things. If you think life is systematical, if you think you have to go from point A to point B to point C, then the chances are excellent you're never going to achieve much because you do not have enough time. Your life isn't enough for you to move in a systematical manner. You need quantum leap, and I'll show you how to do it. Some of us wonder why we don't get success. Some of us wonder why it looks as though you work for years, then get that one payday. While some other people work daily and their rewards are instantly. The problem with the two sides is humans don't get the blueprint to classify themselves in either direction, and for some, they might be in the middle. So when you do not get results, or everybody tilts towards the guy at the left, so once your effort isn't rewarded instantly, you're considered a failure. That's the unfortunate reality. However, in fact, let me share a story. I recall after years of effort, dedication to the cause, when I made my first million, before then, I had already devised the plan for my empire and the different factions, my brothers and associates with working. I've identified their strengths, their weaknesses, what they can do better, who they can be when working with NSC, and place them accordingly. In fact, before we move on, this is an advice to the upcoming generation. Once you're hoping for something, always ask yourself, what is the best move to do in this situation? I have no money, I have nothing, I have no access to capital. The best move in that situation was to draft the business plan, was to write. Hmm, that's the problem with you peasants and vassals. You're hopeless, you're anxious, you're depressed. But instead of trying to do something actively to get you out of that situation, A, you might not get out of the situation. B, you might get out of the situation. But if you do nothing, the failure is guaranteed. If you do nothing, the chances of you getting out of that situation is impossible. Your stagnation is guaranteed. And most people are comfortable doing nothing to sit and wait to die. I refuse to live that kind of life. I recall one time at the infancy of my career, I looked at a book, and although I've read it 100 times, I'll read it 20 more times because there's no electricity There's no access to the internet. That is the best thing to do in this situation. So back to the story. No, not back to the story. Always ask yourself, what is the best move to do in this situation? Crying isn't the best move. Being anxious and depressed isn't the best move. Wishing and hoping that you had it easier isn't the best move. The best move is always action oriented. So I made my first million. I moved from a tiny apartment to a duplex, purchased an $80,000 car. Before we move on, it is important for me to highlight I've already made my investment layers. In fact, by now you should understand I'm a very strategic individual. I've calculated every single thing. That's why it appears I'm getting it easy. It appears I can spend 200 grand in the first year. No, like I initially highlighted, the businesses, the various investments, every single thing has already been laid out. I was like a man in the desert waiting for that drop of water, waiting for that glimpse, that ember of hope. And when that million came, inshallah, I truly declared it to myself and I believe that it is impossible for me to reverse. It is impossible for me not to be wealthy. It is impossible for me not to build an empire that takes roots across various provinces. It is impossible. I'd rather be dead. When you hear me say I spend X amount, it's not because I'm trying to be extravagant. In fact, my father called me aside and said, son, you're being extravagant. What's the problem? Almost like a check. And I said to him, because he posed the idea of the duplex issue, you're moving from the tiniest of apartments. The apartment was worse than a studio bedroom. So moving from that tiny apartment to a duplex is too much. And I said to him, look, I understand your plight. And truly, I understand what you're saying. However, things have changed. Things have changed. There are times in life where you have to deliberately force yourself out of small environments to expand your thinking, to broaden your horizon, opening you up to possibilities beyond your scope of reference. For instance, I'm a public figure. I go online calling people vassals and peasants. I said, look, I bought this $30,000 watch. Would you rather pay full price and be in an environment where the thieves, the invaders, have to go through the estate gate, then come to the front gate, confront various securities, then the four armed men circling the perimeter, somehow get past the bulletproof door, then your door, and you finally make it to me. I'm standing there with my machete. It's a bloodbath. I'm the final boss. In fact, I would rather go to bed, sleep better at night, rid myself of the anxiousness. I'll give you the example in the second part, in the alternative. Rid myself of the anxiousness, go to bed perfectly, knowing there are eight ghouls and four armed guys circling the perimeter, than to pay half the price, all because I want to start small and worry that someone is going to kick through my door, worry that a fan will disclose my location, worry that I'm going to run into a fan in the hallway. That's a terrible position to be in. And I also said to him that as you begin to rise, your priorities will change. As a younger man working with security, was a thing of morale. It was a thing of joy. It was a thing of pride to work with security. Have all these people open your car door, tend and cater to you is understandable. However, at this stage, at this level, having security is in fact for security. I'm not going to put on a $50,000 watch and get robbed. I'm not going to die the death of a fool because I understand at one stage in my life, if I saw a man with a $50,000 watch without security, it is in the similitude of my ticket out of the trenches, and if he isn't willing to give me that watch voluntarily, I'll pick it up his corpse. Either way, I get the watch, so I know how the game is played. The priorities begin to change. The things we once desired. For instance, my personal development journey was indeed one of the reasons was to get unlimited sexual access. Now at this stage, I don't really care. Ignore them, ignore responses, don't really care. I just want to work. I also said to him, like I said, why am I repeating myself? I also said, being in an environment that encourages growth. For instance, if I wake up in my apartment, tear open my curtain, there's some OnlyFans bitch swimming in my private pool while sipping $2,000 champagne. I look to the right compound and there are tons of luxury cars. I look to the left, there's some unidentified sports car alongside Range Rovers. I look to the front, lot of cars, not even space to park. When I look to my own driveway and it, where the fuck did my life go wrong? So an environment that encourages growth. You don't have millions of dollars staying in two-bedroom apartment and you are the best thinking you've achieved something. Yes, there are men using technology to revolutionize nations. There are men developing ideas, softwares that changes the strata on how we interact with the group. It's a human being who developed TikTok. As a consequence of that development, it forced other establishments like YouTube, Meta platforms, Google platforms that has been in existence for decades to adopt short form content. YouTube came out with shorts. Meta platforms came out with reels. Those are the kind of innovation. In fact, I have a business, and this is the first time I'm stating it publicly. I have a business that manages rental property. And one of the individuals I met in my estate turns out a lot he has an estate himself, a lot of rental properties to manage, and he has been getting fucked over by the barrister. Your lodge has been empty for 2 years while siphoning the cash. Maintenance issue. You find out that at the end of the year, 50% of his earnings has been eroded through fraudulent means disguised as maintenance, client default or tenant default, empty units, vacancies, this percentage, that percentage. I did a very good job with him and I'm still doing a very good job. Inshallah, it's a relationship I will protect at all costs. Now, had I sustained the philosophy of starting small, growing gradually, would I have established that kind of relationship? Exactly. Now, there's a fine line between packaging, as we say it in Africa, and taking your life. There's a fine line with packaging and taking your life. There's nothing wrong in dressing good. There's nothing wrong in increasing your vocabulary. There's nothing wrong in imbibing value systems. But when you go out of the moon to spend, to try and impress, when you go out of the moon to engage in activities you wouldn't usually do, you've crossed that line. You've oscillated from packaging to taking your life. But unfortunately, nobody, nobody wants to do business with a poor man, especially if you're on the receiving end. A poor man can give you business, a poor man can give a rich man business, but if you're on the receiving end, very difficult. Let me strike the balance because I'm sure this has already stirred up the appetite of the impatient people who quickly want to jump seasons and consume all of these luxuries upon their loss. If you are not there, you are not there. If you have to think and worry and constantly think about bills, you are not in that position. Don't take your life. Don't hurt yourself. Don't do something you're not qualified to do. In fact, this is the litmus test. If you can't afford three of something, if you can't buy three of something, then you can't afford it. Forget it. But however, part of you, part of you would have loved to start small, two-bedroom apartment, a tiny little Mercedes, then you move to another apartment, then you upgrade in that manner. Part of me would have loved that, honestly. However, I understand the full reality of things. If I go that route, there will be little to no room for growth. Number two, my safety will be compromised. There's this guy on the internet, and God rest heaven. How do I say that? May his soul rest in peace. He sold fish online. His name is called Fish Magnet. He was a Nigerian man who sold fish at a highly subsidized rate. Unfortunately, he violated this principle of quantum leap, and as a consequence, he paid with his life. Literally, he lost his life. Literally, he got kidnapped until today. He got kidnapped. They requested for ransom. His parents or his people paid the ransom until today. He's nowhere to be found. So your safety matters. If you've gotten to a point where you're famous, you're making money on the internet, worry about your safety, especially if you're in third world countries where insecurity is at its all-time high. Even worse, it's very difficult to track your killer. There are no CCTV cameras, there are no intelligence departments, none of that. Finally, I want to tell you something. The last thing I'll leave you with is to give yourself permission to take that quantum leap. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be unusual at first, going from $0 or $10 to hundreds of thousands, millions for some, tens of millions. Suddenly, everybody wants to be your friend. People are taking to you. It's almost like a Joseph Pharaoh experience. For those of you who are non-Christians, I'll share the story. Joseph was called from the dungeon and immediately interpreted the dream of Pharaoh, which nobody in the whole of Egypt could. He was instantly given the status of prime minister. So within a second, he went from being a prisoner to prime minister. I'm sure it would have felt weird at first. I'm sure it would have taken him time to adapt. However, I want you to give yourself permission to take quantum leaps. And as always, my friends, the pleasure speaking to you. I'll see you in the next one.